I once heard someone say, like, the parachute doesn't open when you're on the cliff, right? And I stayed on the cliff for way too long of my life, like way too long. I just stayed on the cliff. I'm like, hey, why is this parachute not opening? Who's going to catch me? Who's going to save me? And then it just took this simple conversation of saying, hey man, the parachute only opens if you jump. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks as like the most profound thing I had ever heard. Literally the next day I quit my 9-to-5 job.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Dichotomy podcast. This is a show dedicated to exploring the dichotomies we experience in business and in life. My name's Reid, and I'm a guy who's incredibly fascinated by understanding why we make the decisions we do in life, and ultimately how do we lead a good life. As a business owner, I get the pressures of managing business, family, money, health can create great inner conflicts around what we actually want out of our business and our lives. This podcast is dedicated to exploring just that. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, ladies and gents. It is Reid here, and welcome to another episode of the Dichotomy podcast with my friend, Karan Nijhawan. I hope I'm saying your name correctly, Karan. But please do not let that distract you, ladies and gents, from the incredible deep conversation that I got to have with Karan this morning, whatever it was, on the Dichotomy podcast. And wow, like I feel like this is definitely one of those episodes that is going to leave you sitting on the edge of your seat. Let's say that much. We got to go to some pretty raw and, vulnerable places, right? Talking about the dichotomies that Karan has faced in his life that he's currently going through right now. I think you're going to love it. But before I get into some of that stuff, just to give a bit of background, he's the founder of a company called JUBE, which stands for Just Be. He's built his business through investing in his relationships and creating, vulnerable conversations through unconventional strategy of hosting dinners. So Karan actually has hosted over 150 dinners for companies like TedX, Forbes, Evio Beauty, I think is the way I say that, and ultimately to help them build relationships within their community, within their teams, and ultimately what he's on a journey to, or a mission to do, is to redefine what company culture is truly about. So pretty cool job, pretty cool gig to be doing. And so, I got connected to Karan through some mutual friends here in Toronto, and I think we originally connected through Instagram, and he reached out and we met one another at another dinner somewhere, and he was just the kind of guy that I really admired for how honest he was, just kind of like honest about his feelings, honest about who he was, and you didn't get the sense there were too many masks, right? It's like he was being real. And, I think in life, when you come across those people, they strike you. And that's the way that I felt about Karan from the outset. And, in this conversation, we explore some dichotomies around, for him, he's on a journey or a bit of a quest to potentially move countries. And he's moved himself, uprooted his life from a few different destinations around Canada to come to Toronto. And he and his partner are looking at moving to Barcelona in Spain. And of course, that comes with its own challenges, right? Does he leave behind everything that he's built and created here in pursuit of this new horizon? And then what happens if he goes and doesn't kind of work out according to plan? How does he navigate that journey? And what are some of the fears and the apprehensions that he's experiencing in deciding whether to embark upon that next step in his own life? We talk about his relationship with his environment growing up and the dichotomies that come with that, from being in a small town and a small town kind of mentality or mindset to, moving to, inverted commas, the big smoke here in Toronto, and many more stories around relationships, around love, around really figuring out what makes us happy, right? What makes him happy? What makes you happy? These are important questions that we all wrestle with day to day, right? Of course, some of us think about them more deeply than others. Some of us maybe completely ignoring those questions, not even on their radar or awareness. And yet, this show is really about bringing awareness to those deeper, more important questions that I think we're all on a quest to find answers to one way or another, whether we know it or not. And that is what this show, I guess, is all about. As business leaders, as entrepreneurs, with the unique challenges we face, how do we find peace, contentment, and fulfillment, both with what we do, but also how we live our lives, to ultimately, build the business and the life that we truly want. So I hope you enjoy this episode as much as I did. And ladies and gents, please put your hands together for Karan. So Karan, welcome to the Dichotomy podcast.
Thank you, man. I'm so grateful to be here with you.
Yeah, dude, right back at you. And I can't remember exactly where we met. I think it was maybe at a Mike Birchich dinner. Was that the first time that we connected?
Actually, you know what? It was the first time we connected in person. I had actually reached out to you via Instagram DM. I'd sent you, like you, I love sending personalized videos, personalized audio messages to people, and noticed you were what seemed to be relatively new to the city. And I said, hey, I love hosting dinners with really cool entrepreneurs. Mike seems cool.
Yes.
And I think that's how we originally connected. And then we met face-to-face at Mike's dinner.
Yeah. And dude, I apologize. I would love to come to one of those. We haven't actually, there hasn't been the opportunity to kind of make that happen just yet. But if the invitation's still open, then
always.
I'd love to join. So I know that you are a man of deep conversation and wanting to really kind of peel back the layers of the onion with the people that you connect with. That's kind of like the work that you do. And I'd love to hear more, or we'd love to hear more about that as you go through. But I thought I might start this episode with a slightly unique direction and ask you, what do you want to talk about?
What I'd love to talk about, and I thank you for saying that, I feel like you're the type of person that also enjoys just going deep and right to it. And I've spent a lot of my life, I think, trying to please others as well as myself by sticking to that surface level. But what I'd love to talk about today is, I know a little bit about your story in terms of where you were in your life, where you were in your business a couple of years ago when you were, in your 20s in Australia, and how you went on this journey, whether it was internally or externally, and you wanted to move and really essentially fly across the world and start a new chapter of your life. And I'm feeling myself in a very similar position right now, where I think the pandemic has opened up my eyes in the sense of how little it is that I truly need to be happy. And not that I was one to always chase external validation, or I'm not materialistic whatsoever, but I think just being stuck at home with my partner has been a blessing in that it's allowed me to grow my business, rethink about my business, rethink about the type of relationships I want in my life, rethink where I want to live, rethink, hey, what does success actually mean? Or am I still using somebody else's measuring stick of success as my own success? So what I'd love to talk about is, I'm in this dichotomy, pun fully intended, where I'm looking at not restarting, but I'm looking at moving to a different country in Spain, in Barcelona, in the next 60 days. And not a lot of people know this. And you're somebody that I feel comfortable sharing this with, as well as these listeners. And, a part of me is juggling the self-limiting stories I'm telling myself of having to start over, build a new network, completely go all in on my online business model, which is very new. It's only a couple of months old that I'm hosting online virtual events now versus in person at dinners. And after hearing you on a recent podcast as well with Dan Dembski, another amazing human, this past weekend I did do the fear setting exercise by Tim Ferriss, and I had about 2 pages of notes where I told myself that none of those stories that I'm telling myself actually have any weight, and the worst case scenario likely will never happen. And even if it does, there's 100 ways to prepare it. So I just vomited a lot at you, but what I would love to talk about is transitioning. I'll turn 31 this year, and life a year ago looked so different, given that, I'm just kind of completing the 1-year cycle of having my own business for the first time. I've always had a side hustle, but I'm just coming up to that tail end of, now it's been 365 days of me not being employed by anyone else, and I've been all in on myself. And I feel like it's taken a year for me to really get clarity on the type of business I want, how I want to grow it, what it looks like. And yeah, just in this intense year of growth, both professionally and personally. And now I'm in this crossroads of my partner and I are fully aligned in terms of where we want to spend the next couple of years, maybe even the next couple of decades overseas. And it's just crazy to think that, we put this out into the universe 30 days ago, and a week later, we had confirmation that we'd be leaving our lease early.
Hey, so I wanted to give a little call to arms for all the entrepreneurs out there and say, you know what, I get it. Business can be really lonely at times, and anyone that tells you it's easier than it is really trying to sell you something. At the end of the day, business is hard, and it's made harder when you don't have an environment around you that gives you the resilience and the support to be able to push through. And it's also moving so quickly. If you're not constantly iterating and tweaking and adapting how you approach growing your business, it's very easy to get left behind, which is a core reason why my company Dent exists. Over the last 10 years and working with 3,000 plus founders, we've been immersing ourselves in the task of refining what creates a high performance environment for entrepreneurs. We realized that things like trial and error, isolation, a lack of accountability and structure, and limited access to great suppliers and resources is the number one thing that holds so many businesses back. And so we've become obsessed with figuring out how do we create an environment for entrepreneurs that combats these challenges. And so through expert mentors, live masterclasses, highly refined best practices, a high-performing peer group, formal structure and accountability, and the tools to get the job done, we've built a 12-month accelerator program that gives business owners the environment they need to grow. So if you're curious to learn more about it, just head to my website, www.mikejamesreid, that's reid.com. And you can navigate to a bunch of resources on Dent, whether it's video case studies, online scorecards, or even a copy of the Canadian edition of the Key Person of Influence book, which I co-authored with my business partner, Daniel Priestley. So if you want to chat more about your business with me personally, there's some ways you can do that on there too. I hope what you find there is useful for scaling your business. Enjoy. So, I mean, dude, let me start by saying, I'm sure for anyone listening as well, we want to give you, I got a big smile on my face. I know we can't see each other. And that's I'm working on that for the podcast, but yeah, huge smile on my face because I love anyone that is so intentional about their life that they're choosing joy and happiness and, the I guess the things that social media and society don't place as maybe as much weight on in terms of success. And yet they're just going all in on listening to their heart and their gut and telling them, what do I need to live a great life? And that's the essence of this show. I think really that for me, that's the essence is like, how do we lead a good life as entrepreneurs? And Seneca said, we suffer more in imagination than we do in reality. And I think Tim Ferriss mentioned that in the TED Talk when he talked about the fear-setting exercise. And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, I certainly, we suffer. I suffer thinking about just trying to solve different problems in the business. Like this week, for example, I felt incredibly overwhelmed. I haven't really felt as overwhelmed over the last few months, but just this week, everything seems to be kind of piling up on me, and I'm got a lot of balls up in the air, and I'm overwhelmed about trying to keep them all up in the air at the same time. So, I guess I share that just to kind of to put a flag up and say salute. I respect that. You mentioned, you realized how little you need to be happy. Can you walk us through some of your revelations about that in the last month?
Absolutely. I grew up in a really small city, small province, East Coast Canada, Newfoundland, which a lot of people have not heard of, but it's the most easterly point in all of North America. And growing up in Newfoundland, when I left India, it was the consensus, at least in my circle, that, hey, you find this job, you stick with it for the next 30, 40 years, you go on your 3 weeks vacation a year, you get your pension, and life is roses. Get married at 30, have a house by 31, kids by 33, very prescripted. And anything outside of that prescripted life in reality, I think was frowned upon. It almost made people feel like, hey, who is this guy who's trying to like be different or be bigger or not want the status quo? And I thought that, hey, if I just left the city, the province, and a part of me felt very restricted in that province because I was hanging around with people that restricted my thinking. And because I was so tied to the province in terms of my family, my business, all my relationships from junior high to high school to university, everything that I knew was St. John's, Newfoundland. And every time I would go on a trip overseas, or even not even overseas, even if I would come to Toronto for like a Raptors weekend, I vaguely remember every single flight back to Newfoundland, a part of my heart would just die. I just felt like, oh my God, I'm going back to quote life of this 3 weeks vacation. So when I left Newfoundland and came to Toronto, I had friends here, and I thought that, hey, this city has everything. It's got entertainment, it's got sports, it's got good weather, it's got restaurants, it's got culture, it's got bigger network, it's got bigger opportunity. Bigger network means bigger opportunity. And a lot of these things are very true. And when you're quarantined for over 100 days by yourself or with your partner, and you're growing your business on a laptop, and you're taking your dog out twice a day for a walk, and you're spending more time in nature, and you're spending more time, more importantly, with yourself. I think I've never spent more time with myself as I've done in the last 90 days. And to me, man, like, we talk about the simple life. I need a journal. I need my laptop. I need my dog and my girlfriend, and I'm good. Like, I'm good. That's all I need. And I think this notion of maybe I thought because I was in the city, I had to be involved in all these groups and all of these communities and all of these, I'd always kind of keep up. And I think I grew my business to a point from a community standpoint where there's always expectations of my next event or of my next dinner, or how the next dinner always has to outdo the last dinner. And I started doing that. I started leveling up, started going from 4-person dinners to 8-person to 20-person to 30-person dinners, and started doing virtual dinners, and started hosting these dinners for companies. And I found myself losing passion for dinners. Like, I was doing dinners, group dinners 4 times a month at one point last year. And I just looked at Brandy. I said, this is not what I wanted. Like, I didn't want to host so many dinners just because I host dinners. And I started to lose passion for it. And I think the more time I'm spending alone with my thoughts, dinners still mean the world to me. Dinners have nothing to do with the food or the restaurant. They've always been the quality and the depth of the conversations. And now that I'm doing that virtually for people in the Philippines and people in Europe and all across the US, all in on the same dinner, I think it's just showed me that, geographically is your city, your province, your country doesn't really define your success like I once thought it did. I no longer need to be in the city because I thought, hey, this is where I need to be. Where I think the old me saw Toronto as opportunity. And now I guess the new me just sees my own vision and my own self-alignment as the real opportunity.
I think this is the dichotomy, isn't it? Between, do you focus on growth at the expense of all else? And it's like all in on growth and bigger and more, and versus, what is the minimum you need to just kind of have what you want in life, which, as you said, your dog and girlfriend and nature and just the simple elements. I think that is a question that, you're no doubt still wrestling with. I wrestle with. I think many people listening wrestle with is that how do we kind of find that balance, and what are the trade-offs? What are the pros and cons of each? Have you thought that through? Have you got any more clarity around, what would you be happy to sacrifice, and what would you be not willing to sacrifice in order to, lead more of the life that you want?
Yeah, I have done some work on that, more in particular in the last couple of days, just by mapping out some of my biggest, most darkest what if scenarios. I mapped them out in hey, what if this happens? How would I prepare it? And what if this happens? How can I prevent it? And I've realized that although there's a lot I can do to prevent my worst case scenarios from coming to fruition, I think the sheer nature of me wanting to prevent some of these scenarios actually restricts me in a growth capacity. I think I've become comfortable in my current norm. And now that I'm trying to not rock that boat of comfort or the community that I've built here, or my friend circle, my entrepreneur circle here. I think because I've become comfortable and a little bit stagnant in my own practice, I think me planting these fake what if scenarios is actually preventing the real growth on the other end, saying, hey, dude, maybe it's just time for you to level up and think about your business differently. So I think a part of me is holding on to the comfort of what I've built in the last 3 years here. Whereas I know deep down, kind of like that true version of me inside, like the guy who goes to bed at night who thinks about this, is that holding on to comfort is actually preventing me from growing. But the comfortness feels so good that it's difficult just to walk away from.
Yeah, because you mentioned the word, transition. Like you are going through a transition, and it brings a question up for me, which is, how do you know when's the right time to do a transition? Because, on one side, I'm sure you could relate to, some people, maybe you've got examples in your own life where maybe they did a transition, it just didn't work out in the way they hoped or expected it to, and other people go on a transition similar to, my story where I moved from Australia to Canada, and to me, it was a life-changing transition for the better, right? It was just the perfect storm of ingredients that meant that I went through this really wonderful kind of transition in my life and ended up in this new place with this love of my life and new business, and it got kind of all worked out. I'm not really sure exactly what made that work out compared to another transition that doesn't. What's your take on that?
I think it's you're very much into the stoicism, and I think it's very much your outlook and your perspective. I think you chose to look for opportunity when you were considering Vancouver. You chose to look for opportunity when you met your now girlfriend. Perspective matters so much. And I think I spent a lot of my life, my early life, again, being around restrictive thinking environments. I spent a lot of my time worrying about what's step 4, what's step 5. Hey, if I make this step, what's step 10? And I would never take step 1 because I couldn't see step 3 and 4. And I think being with a partner who's also an entrepreneur, who has literally gone from nothing to, like from living in a women's shelter to having a very thriving business. I think being with someone like that kind of shows you what perseverance and grit and resilience really means. And, she's just as happy with 10 cents in her bank account as she is with a, multi-million-dollar purchase order. And her norm even till today fluctuates from those two extremes. And I just think being in an environment where her habits are rubbing off on me on a positive, in a positive light. Mm-hmm. I think that's just really helped me take bigger risks. It's, I think there's a reason why I left my 9-to-5 while I was with Brandy and not with any of my previous partners. I think there was something there from a habit, from a nurture, from just being in her environment that created this sense of safety. It created the sense of, hey, I got you. Like, you got to leap. Not that she ever pushed me, but something about her presence made me feel like, hey, I can do anything, and I've got support in my corner, which is something I've never felt before in a relationship. And now when I see this word transition, Brandy doesn't even recognize me from who I was last year, nor do I recognize myself from who I was 2 months ago. And now I'm much more willing to say yes and figure it out later, and willing to take that step 1 and fail, and then find step 2 for myself, then find step 3. Whereas the old me needed the entire roadmap before ever taking the first step, which always kept me kind of playing small.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of people listening who can really resonate with what you just shared, dude. And that's entrepreneurship, isn't it? Like if you mm-hmm. need to see step 5 before you can take step 1, like you almost can't be an entrepreneur. It's kind of not how it works. You mentioned before restrictive thinking. Where did that come from?
Restrictive thinking. So in my household, my dad is a business owner. My grandfather was a business owner. I always knew I wanted to do business. I just didn't know what it looked like. My sister chose the medical route. She became a pharmacist. In Newfoundland, the type of culture, at least during when I was being raised, was very much, hey, you find a great job and you don't leave it. And in Newfoundland, oil and gas makes up 1/3 of the province's GDP. So if you got a job in oil and gas, everyone knew that oil and gas paid the most. They had the best benefits, the best growth opportunities, the best travel opportunities. And when you're fresh out of university at, 21, 22, and that type of job, when you're in your early 20s making like really good money in a province where cost of living is so little, you think you're on top of the world. I remember being on contract in my position thinking, holy shit, I just made it. At that point, the salary was $55,000 a year. I was like, oh my God, I'm on top of the world right now. Like this was like, early 20s. And then you get promoted, and then you get equity, then you get stock options, then you just immerse yourself deeper in that culture. And again, like you become your environment. So if my entire environment, from friends to mentors to peers, were all in oil and gas. So I started to look and talk and breathe and feel and act just as my peers would, because it was safe. Going to all the oil and gas shows, going to the conference once a year, getting my 3 weeks vacation. And the moment I started tasting a dose of, hey, I could run my own online business, and I started a fitness business online called Fit Opportunity a long time ago, which was kind of my first segue into trying to operate my own online business. And I made my first sale of like $200 online. I was like, oh my God, somebody from Portland, Oregon just bought a $200 fitness product. This is amazing. And I showed it, right? It completely blew my mind. It was a $200 sale for like a 12-week program. Talk about like really undervaluing yourself. And that just kind of opened up my eyes. And I realized not a lot of my friends were doing this. They weren't really into business. They were all, medical or financial type of guys. And I found that ideas like this would get squashed or stomped upon. And that was really the impetus of me creating or hosting my first dinners in the first place, was that I didn't want these conversations to get squashed. I didn't want these conversations not to be the norm. And I couldn't find a place where these were the norm. So that's why I started hosting my own dinners. And I say restrictive thinking because my environment didn't allow for growth. Growth was, again, viewed on, there's this old saying, I love Newfoundland. I think it's the friendliest people in the entire world. It's always going to be home. My family's there. I love the province. But there is this saying, and you hear about it when you leave Newfoundland, it's that Newfoundlanders want you to succeed, but not to be too successful, right? It's this interesting dichotomy of, hey, we want you to do well, but don't do too well, because like, remember where you came from.
To say, there's a saying in Australia called tall poppy syndrome.
Okay, what's that?
And tall poppy syndrome is if you imagine a field of poppies, which is a flower. Tall poppy is when there's a poppy that rises above the rest of the field. In Australia, the culture is to cut that poppy down because, similar thing. Australians don't like the tall poppy, the person who's confidently, excelling above everyone else, or, choosing to kind of step above the pack. There's a culture of cut the tall poppy down because, for the same reason, it's like, we want you to be the same as us type thing. And that's a culture I never really resonated with at all. And so, I think it's a culture that doesn't exist in places like the US. And that's sort of what drew me to North America, is that, it seems a different culture here from that culture in Australia.
I can even remember that, whenever people used to move out of Newfoundland and to a bigger city, whether it was Montreal or Vancouver or Toronto, those people would often be referred to as like big shots. That was just the term we put on people who left the province. Right away, we'd call them big shots. They'd only come home for Christmas. They'd come home, for Thanksgiving. We'd see them twice a year. Like, oh, you guys are living that city life. Like, you guys are all big shots. And it was never viewed as positive, in my opinion. It was always viewed as, hey, that person is now a big shot. So when I left Newfoundland and then, quote, I started coming home for Christmas or just 3 or 4 times a year to visit my family, obviously my network started to dwindle. I wasn't in contact with the people the same way I used to be. And I would often hear in my catch-up meetings with my friends, like, hey, like, how's big shot life? And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, what? And I couldn't really understand until I moved away and then came home. And then somebody referred me as a big shot. And I was so taken back, because for me, I was just, leaving behind a scenario where I wanted to just get out of and grow my own wings. But it was so interesting that, like, whenever you'd come back home and catch up with friends, there would be this interesting, they would view you differently. They would view, my clothes were different. I was wearing jeans with ripped knee caps or like knee areas. And they were like, oh, look at Big Shot wearing like Toronto clothes. So like, I get the fun in that and the kind of the slight camaraderie in that, but there's also a much deeper rooted meaning there. It's not just someone making fun of you. there is something very deep rooted there of, hey, like you're now like a city slicker.
Yeah, I hear. So the move to Barcelona, what's the dichotomy in that?
I think originally the dichotomy was this essence of hitting the reset button, or at least the perception of hitting reset on something now that I built this network in St. John's and I left. I built this network in Toronto and now I'm thinking about leaving. And it's never running away from something. For me, it's always been running to something. And the dichotomy of Barcelona really started when a friend of mine he runs his own marketing agency. He's been living remotely for the last number of months in various cities in Mexico. He's also now going to Barcelona, him and his partner. So what started off as, hey, let's do this temporarily for 3 months and go try it. Having a partner who has kind of already, quote, been there, done that. Like she's lived that life. I haven't. I always admired people that could, quote, work remotely. And I never could up until last year, but I chose not to. I stayed in the city and kind of just did my own thing. And the dichotomy was, man, Karan, are you hitting the reset button again? Like, you've been here now 3 years. You're just starting to get a lay of the land in the city. You've built this network. You know people, where the intersections are. Like for me, it really took about 2 to 3 years for me to get a lay of the land in this massive city. And now a part of me feels like, even though the fear setting exercise had demonstrated to me that there is no worst case scenario, there is still that 1% or 2% within me that feels like I'm hitting the reset. And I know in ways it's causing me to grow because I'm thinking about my business and my life differently, even future kids. Like we want to grow, we want to raise them in Europe. But there is this small internal dialogue of myself asking myself, hey, like, are you hitting the reset button again?
Where do you think that comes from?
I think it comes from not accomplishing what I feel like I've wanted to accomplish in this city. I feel like I had this mental picture of what I wanted life to look like in this city, the type of business, the type of community, the type of friends, the type of mentors, the type of peers. And I think I didn't live up to my own goals or my own expectations. And I think I became comfortable. And I think there was just, I think a lot of internal stories that I've been telling myself as to what a success actually means to me versus the standards or expectations other people may have or the successes that they might have had in their business. I think I'm wearing some internal weight on my shoulders as to what I wanted life to look like for the last 3 years. And I'm also being very hard on myself, which I tend to do.
Dude, I can relate. And I know there will be plenty of people listening who could as well. This is something, an area of my life, which I've always, I don't know whether the struggle is the right word, but I very hard on myself and high expectations for myself and for others. And so it can be difficult to, just be content and, satisfied with what I've done. Thinking back to some of the times where you've had some of your greatest accomplishments or success, do you look back on those times and do you feel you can really absorb the success of that moment or that experience?
Man, I struggle with that a lot. I struggle a lot with creating a goal and hitting it and not really soaking it in or not really celebrating. And my sister recently texted me when I told her, hey, I just closed a really big deal, which is I'm going to, implement this half-day workshop for this company. And what I'm getting in that half day is what I used to make as my entire month's salary at my 9 to 5. And she's like, oh my God, like half day versus what you would have like killed yourself for a month. Like, what are you doing to celebrate? And I remember it was a Sunday. I was like, I don't know. I'm just going to keep working. And I don't know. I celebrated mentally for about a minute and I kind of caught myself wondering why I haven't really celebrated, and I still haven't celebrated. And that was a number of weeks ago. And I think there's something internally telling me, Karan, like, you're not there yet. Or like when you get there, it's like my girlfriend refers to it as arrival syndrome. Like when you get there, when this happens. And the more I read about Stoicism, I understand that, today is the only day you can control, and your perspective and your outcomes and how you choose to show up. And this is the journey that I chose. This is the journey that I'm on, and I can't see what's going to happen 4 days from now. But I think there's this level of self-validation that I haven't hit yet. And I realize that my measuring stick of success right now is very much financial. Being in year one of my business, or just completing year one, I think I define my own success not by the number of amazing dinners that I've hosted or the amazing people I've met in the last number of years. Like, I've met some such amazing, thought-provoking people like yourself, Mike, who are just, they're ready to go deep, have real conversation. There's no ego. There's just this sense of camaraderie and belonging. But for me, I think where the real deep-rooted thing is for me is I grew up in a house where finances were always a concern. Not a deep concern, but there were enough of a burden growing up in a household where I knew money was going to be tight. I knew I couldn't have it all. I knew I couldn't get, that vacation. And seeing my dad struggle in his business and watching his business decline as retail started to take a dip in the industry, as rents started to rise, as foot traffic to the mall he was in started to go down and completely dwindle, I realized that he had it so hard, and he did a lot for me. But growing up in a household where you were always talking about money or credit cards or bank statements or debts, or, hey, like, someone's going to knock on the door tomorrow, there's something very deep and very real within me to this day where I need that financial validation, because I knew what lack felt like. And I knew that, hey, we had problems because we didn't have money. My parents fought because we didn't have money. The amount of fights I would hear while I would close my door in my room, I knew it was about money. Like, how hard my parents had to work, I knew it was always about money. So there's this interesting, not great relationship with finances in my psyche. And a part of me does feel like, hey, like, that's the answer. Like, one more contract, one more bigger deal, one more retainer client, one more member. Like, there's always this thing of, like, enough is not enough until it is enough. And that is also, like, that hasn't been easy, and it's caused, many disagreements in my relationship as well. Being with somebody who's okay with, she'll publicly say that she's okay with 10 cents or 50,000 in the bank, like her fluctuation. And she comes from a place of not having anything. So for her, like, she's grateful that we have milk in the fridge. For me, like, I don't view it the same way, because again, my upbringing and her upbringing were very different. So for me, I think the financial validation doesn't really have a lot to do with the money. It has a lot to do with the sense of comfort and freedom that would allow.
How would you rate yourself in terms of letting the love in from Brandy despite whatever you earn?
That's a great question. And I struggled with that when we first started dating, because she was this prolific female entrepreneur who grew up in a women's shelter to create this multi-million-dollar e-commerce cosmetics company. And a part of me early in our dating felt like, not by anything she did, but a part of me felt like she was going to leave me. A part of me felt like, hey, why would someone like that be with someone like me? Like, I don't even have my own business, or, I'm just starting my own business. There was a lot of this comparison syndrome. Seeing her go on flights to speak at conferences, to keynote this, keynote that, to be in this magazine. And there was a lot of comparison where I almost self-sabotaged the relationship from the perspective of, hey, there must be a catch here. Like, what does, she obviously saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I had to wrestle with that for a long time. I still remember when she was on a business trip in Tokyo, and she called me crying in disbelief of how much she was hating her life right now, just like being on flights and never being home. And part of me felt like, honestly, it felt like, hey, I don't even know why you're with me. Like, I'm a nobody compared to you. So there's been nothing but love and gratitude from her perspective. I think earlier on in the relationship, there was this comparison syndrome, which is slowly dwindling away, and it's miles in front of where it was a year ago at this time. But I think fully letting her in, I think there's still something where I'm trying to prove to myself, like, hey, I can do it, or I can grow my business to X degree. And a part of me does feel stuck in that until I get that validation, I'm never going to fully let go. And, or more importantly, I'm never going to fully let the love in because I haven't achieved what I want to achieve.
Oh man, this is like so close to home for me. And I'll share a quick story if I can. So I met Jen, my wonderful, gorgeous, stunningly beautiful girlfriend, intelligent, wise, funny, positive. And I met her about 18 or so months ago, a couple of years. I prefer not to think about time, but we had this incredible, meeting and connection where within 24 hours of meeting one another, this is at Burning Man in 2018, within 24 hours of meeting her, I said to her, we were sitting down on the playa in Burning Man on the dust with the sun setting and the sky is this incredible hue of red and purple and yellow and orange and just magical moment. And was sitting down, look across from one another in kind of like a meditation, and I look across her and I say, "Hey, I know this sounds completely crazy and strange, but I just want to tell you that in this moment, I love you." And she looks back at me and she kind of echoes the same comment back to me. And then, by the end of that week, I decided I was going to move my life to Toronto, and like she was the one, right? Doof. And it was just instant, just new. And funnily enough for me, Jen's an incredible entrepreneur. She runs a couple of bridal boutiques in downtown Toronto, and highly capable, highly intelligent. She's 32 years old and, has had a lot of great success financially and professionally and all that kind of stuff to date. And, met me when I literally had a backpack and very little to my name other than, assets and whatever else in Australia. But I had nowhere I was living. I had no furniture. I had nothing apart from a backpack and some boxes back in Australia packed up with some books, and that was about it. And so, I met her at a time when, again, the same thing for me, where I very much, my validation was built around external measures of success. And I would think that a woman like that would only be interested in me when, I had all the kind of common trappings of success. And part of the beauty of that trip was letting go of my identity around, who I was, this entrepreneur running a business called Dent, and had these things in Australia too. I'm just a guy like traveling the world, I'm just Mike, and I'm going to show up as Mike, and you can either love Mike or you're not into Mike. But she just totally loved every fiber of my being, of who I was, as just Mike. And that was very profound because that changed my relationship to myself, and it changed my relationship to her. And then as I came here and started expanding the business here in Toronto, where, I had nothing, I was starting with, a very small amount of capital to get the business up and running here and not taking any income and just, drawing down on cash in the bank. And so I was constantly feeling the pressure of needing to try and maintain this identity of the kind of person that someone like her would be with or date. And constantly she would continue to hold the mirror up and remind me that none of that mattered, and that, she just totally was in love with the person in the mirror, who I was, and irrespective of whatever I had or could achieve. And that, in fact, she didn't care about any of that. She just wanted me to be, fully there and present, and give her, all of my spirit and my essence and my energy in love. And again, it's just such a good reminder that, when you can show up as that person for your partner, and you can have a partner that can reflect back to you that is all that matters. Wow. Like, that is powerful.
Dude, I'm nodding right now. I'm nodding and I'm smiling because I totally hear you. I see you. I can feel you. And having Brandy just consistently be kind of my mirror and holding that up for me. And for her, it's all she cares about is my smile, right? Like, I mean, in the sense of like, she doesn't care what's in the bank. She doesn't care what clothes I have on. It's as long as I just make her smile and just smile at her and know that I've got her and she's got me, like she's good. And she has never once, demanded anything. She's never once said, hey, like, have you thought about, you should grow your business that way? And like, we have great conversations about business, but she's always been there to support like crazy ideas, good and bad. She's been there to support all my late night dinners. She's always helping me co-host. She's an unbelievable resource, and never once has she judged or never once has she compared. And I realized that she never did. She never did. It was always me. It was always me bringing my own insecurities to the conversation, or my own insecurities to our relationship or our conversations. It was never her. She's totally fine with just as long as we're in a good place, like nothing else really matters. And it's amazing that, it's a lesson I'm still learning today, because although I love that about her and I appreciate it so much, and it literally means the world to me, there's still something inside of me that is not 100% willing to absorb that. Earlier, you asked me if I was ready to let that love in, and I would say I'm at about 99%, but there's still that 1% of Karan who needs that self-validation. It's like when I grew up overweight and I didn't learn how to swim because I got made fun of in grade 6 for taking my shirt off at a public pool. I didn't learn how to swim until I was then 26. 15, 20 years went by where all my friends were like, dude, you got to learn how to swim. It's a key life skill and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, guys, I get it. I understand the importance of swimming. I understand. What they didn't understand was the mental challenges I was having with my own self-body image of that moment in grade 6, all the vacations I said no to, or all the pool parties I never went to, or all the hot tub gatherings that I would avoid. And it was only because there was something I had to do for myself. The self-validation to me mattered so much more than the external, obvious situation. So yeah, I think there's that 1% of me that last year at this moment, that number probably would have been 50-50. 50% of myself would have been willing to let that love in, and the other 50% still had to prove it to myself. And now I'd say I'm at that 99 and 1.
I think that's pretty remarkable. If you can be at only 1% left, then I'd say you are doing a lot better than the vast majority of the population, especially the entrepreneurial population. So dude, that's great. Oh, man, I feel like I want to take a deep sigh. That was really cathartic. Thank you.
I appreciate you, man. Thank you for giving me this space.
So you've hosted 150 plus, dinners on really deeply connecting with people. I'm assuming many of them are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial people. What have you noticed? What are the trends that many entrepreneurs are struggling with when it comes to the dichotomies in their own life or business?
Man, there's so many commonalities in these dinners, whether they're virtual, whether they're for companies, whether they're for the entrepreneurs. It's unbelievable that, number one, entrepreneurs at every level are suffering from imposter syndrome. I would talk to guys with 7-8-figure companies at my dinner sometimes, and they're having the same doubts that I'm having, being a year into my business. There's always a conversation of how much their network has gotten smaller as they've gotten more honed in on their craft, and how small their network really is, but also how many friends they've had to let go of, how many friends that no longer serve them. Or, for me personally, like my Friday nights are often a walk in the park with Brandy or with my laptop, and we're both working or we're doing something fun. They're not drinking. They're not going on a patio and just slamming down beers and, crushing like a night out. Like it's just not who I am anymore. And I think I see that a lot in my circles as well, is that the quality of the conversations for entrepreneurs matters so much more than the quantity of people, or, this word Rolodex that we often hear about. And what I've noticed is that entrepreneurs who have more quality relationships than quantity relationships are much happier, and they're more of themselves. Earlier you said you were just Mike, And Mike has one persona. He's Mike. And you can either like him or love him or leave him. And I find that the really happiest entrepreneurs at my dinners, like the ones who, quote, don't give a shit about what other people think, they're just so much more fun to be around. They're themselves. They're not wearing the Gucci watch. They're not wearing, like, they're just wearing like whatever. It's got nothing to do with even the clothes. The other thing I've also learned is that almost all of them still to this day will say that they have no idea what they're doing. They're just figuring stuff out one day at a time. And whether they're 3 years in the business or 10 years, to this day, they say, man, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm doing what feels right to me. The right people come along for the ride, and the wrong, or quote, the ones who don't agree with me don't. And I'm okay with that. And I think also like the last trend that I see is that I would say 80% plus take part in some form of therapy, whether it's speech therapy, whether it's psychedelics, whether it's, visualization, whether it's silence retreats, whether it's journey quests or like self quests, and like that world of psychedelics and that world of therapy is, which in most of my circles in the past would have been like a taboo, or like, hey, we don't talk about that stuff. This stuff is actually celebrated. This stuff is talked about very openly and publicly. And it's helped change my perspective of the word drug. Growing up in a small city and in a small town, if you smoked marijuana, like you were a bad boy, like you were going to get in trouble. Anything more, quote, potent than marijuana, like, wow, you were next level. Like, wow, how dare you? And like, how dare you do drugs? And I think my relationship with that word and just the connotation of what does a drug really mean? And is it a stimulant? Is it a depressor? Is it like, what are the psychedelics? It's those conversations are actually really fun to be around in some of my dinners, because I know so little about that world. But I find that a lot of the trends that I see, at least these days, like these conversations are now becoming more normal, or at least more normalized.
It's funny, you mentioned the word therapy before. It reminds me of one thing that I found really helped me, and may or may not help you, Karan, is when I was sitting down with our therapist, who Jen and I see, I call it couples development rather than therapy, just because I like to reframe it and do it just as a means to be able to, talk through thoughts and thinking and, work out our mental and emotional muscle in the same way you work out your body at the gym. And one thing that was pointed out to me was we were talking about perfection, and me striving towards doing things of such a high standard that I place high expectations on myself and others, and it really converges towards this idea of perfectionism. And this person pointed out to me, it's like, look, Mike, you are excellent in what you do. You're excellent in, how you approach your work, your relationship with Jen, how you show up as a human being. Like you bring a high degree of excellence. But excellence is not perfection. Perfection implies that there is some unattainable, level of achievement that if you strive for it, you'll always be disappointed. But being excellent means that, you show up in the way that you do. You deliver great work and great yourself fully in a relationship, let's say, but very different to perfection. And I found that distinction so helpful, because it just got me sort of stepping into this space of, I can be excellent and still falter and have insecurities and self-doubt and a bit of lack of confidence over certain things, or hold high expectations, but I'm still nonetheless, excellent in what I do.
That's so powerful, man. Do you ever struggle with that when you're among peers, people that are like-minded, people that are also, high achievers, high performance entrepreneurs? Do you ever find yourself, I guess, comparing your level of excellence to someone else's?
Of course, all the time. And this is, I guess, a good dichotomy for us to unpack, because I feel like comparison is the root of so much dissatisfaction, so much discontent, so much unhappiness. If we didn't have anything to compare to, or if we were to very selectively compare ourselves two people that are worse off than ourselves, there is some little flaw in the human psyche that makes us feel great about that. Either no comparison, or we compare ourselves to people that we perceive to be, I should underscore that, perceived to be doing worse than us or having less than us or whatever it is. We'll generally feel good about ourselves. But as soon as I start comparing myself, looking at someone who's got, what I perceive to have a lot more than me in some area, and again, I think perception is so important to underscore that word, then it creates a feeling of just discontent. What's your experience of that?
That's so powerful, man. That is so powerful. And lately, as I've been, as I continue to meet new people and be around like-minded peers, people that are in front of me in the entrepreneurial journey, whether again as perceived or realistic, what I found, what example just came to mind was when I said earlier, if my sister, when my sister asked me, what am I doing to celebrate the biggest quote contract that I've closed? I didn't celebrate because that week I know that a friend of mine closed a bigger contract. And it's so interesting how my friend, who I love this guy, he's like one of my best friends. And we were just talking about the proposals we had sent out that week and we were just kind of comparing our businesses. And I also, the fact that he's been doing this for 5 or 6 years and I'm year one in, like none of that matters to me. At some points in my conversations, I'm still comparing myself to who he is today and who I am today. But it's so interesting that I didn't celebrate that deal. And a part of me, up until this podcast, still doesn't know why I didn't celebrate. But I think deep rootedly, it's also my peer group is also on this level that I'm striving to be a part of. And maybe that's why I didn't celebrate.
Isn't there again, another dichotomy in this, though, that if we don't have a high-performing peer group to surround ourselves with, then, often we won't go out and achieve the things that we, would like to achieve, or there's, like we are the product of our peers, we're the product of our environment. So again, it's like, how do you balance that between being in a high-performing environment that does foster growth, if that's one of your priorities or something that you value, but while on that growth path, also remain content with the fact you might be at the bottom of the pack in that group?
That's so interesting. And I think that's where I see massive growth opportunities for myself, not financially, but just from a life perspective. I think there's some life growth that happens in that phase of just understanding what you just said, just having the sheer insight into knowing that there is a dichotomy there of the peer group versus your perceived output versus your perceived financial success. I think being aware of that and still being okay with the guy or the girl looking at you in the mirror and going to bed that night happy, I think that's where true joy is. Earlier you said comparison, and I can't remember what book it was, but it said comparison is the thief of joy. And maybe it was Think and Grow Rich, maybe it was Napoleon Hill. And I find myself, definitely in this dichotomy where my peers, some are doing much better, others I'm motivating to do better. But isn't it interesting that you're always kind of looking at who's in front of you? And maybe it's just also showing you the possibilities. I feel like I'm 1 year into my business. Mike, I'm not sure how long you've had your business running for, but being 1 year in, only now am I really seeing, hey, I could have been doing this for the last year, but I'm almost glad I didn't, because I needed to go through my own learning and my own journey before I was able to even absorb these types of conversations.
To me, I think the metaphor that comes to mind is reframing your relationship, like my relationship, our relationship, with what it means to be the small fish in a big pond. And then at the moment, we might have like the relationship we have to the pond and the fish in the pond is that the biggest, fattest fish is the best. And that what if instead we believed in to the DNA of our cells in our body, that being the small fish in the big pond is actually where you want to be. Because every moment that you're the smaller fish in a bigger pond, that is creating a place for you to grow. And that if growth is the highest priority and the highest value, then when you find yourself as too big a fish in a small pond, then you've outgrown your environment, and that's plateaued growth, and that's a bad thing. That's a negative thing. The joy is always coming in being the smaller fish in a bigger pond from forcing growth. Karan, I would love to know, for someone who, again, has curated so much community, and I think in a world where we are in quarantine and everyone's feeling a little bit isolated, how do strangers at distance become a community?
And I love that question. And I think the reason I love that question is because everyone thinks that they need to have certain resources available to them to start building their own network. You need to be, a part of me felt like I needed to be in the right city. A part of me felt like I needed to be around more, quote, A players. I needed to be in a different environment. And some of that is true just from a psyche and a motivational perspective. But with the use now of just your phone, your computer, and Wi-Fi, I think there's never been a better time to create your own community, create your own. It doesn't even, this word community sometimes is also perceived as like it needs to be this massive thing. Like I've got a small community, but I love every single one of the people in that community. I know them very well. I know them very intimately. I know them. I know what keeps them up at night. Like there's a difference also in the quality of your network and the quantity of your network. But I think if you're someone who's trying to build your community now, or your tribe, or you just need those 5 people to help you level up, what I would honestly recommend is that it's never been easier to connect with somebody, and it's never been easier to stand out in that connection than ever before. I think most people tend to build relationships when they need something. So I'm only going to reach out to Mike if I need to be on his podcast. I'm only going to reach out to Karan if I want to come to a future dinner. Like you're already in this reactive mental state because you're already thinking you need something. If you feel like you need something, you're already late, right? Like that relationship needs to be invested in 6 months ago or 12 months ago. So like start now. Look at, I think Jordan Harbinger has this exercise where he says, if you were to lose your job today, who would be the 5 or 10 people that you would call for advice or network or resources, or who are those 10 people that could put you in touch with so-and-so from a referral standpoint? And reach out to them. Just say, hey, Mike, it's been a while. Not sure what you're up to these days. This is what I'm working on. Would love to connect. P.S. No rush on your response. I realize you're busy, but let me know when you're free. Just very casually reach out to 5 or 10 people in your network that you just want to get to know deeper. I've done this cold where I don't even know these people, right? When I started hosting my first dinners, I didn't know 30% of the people that were coming to my dinners. I just knew they seemed fascinating from what I saw on their social profiles. They're people I wanted to connect with. And when you connect with people without the expectation of selling them something, or without even having this dose of, hey, like I'm only reaching out to you because I need you to buy my thing later, people can sniff that a mile away. Like human beings are so smart. If you're reaching out with an expectation of closing business, do not reach out to that person. Go with the intent of making a friend. And anytime I've tried to make a friend with someone, it's somehow naturally down the road turned into a cool business opportunity. And if not, great. Now we're great friends. But anytime I've tried to approach a relationship with a clear expectation of, hey, I need something, it just doesn't work. And that's just my own personal take on relationships is like, go in with the expectation of value and give and see where you could be of assistance and not be like everyone else who's reaching out because they want something. And virtually start inviting people to a virtual coffee, and then bring groups of 3, then turn those groups of 3 into groups of 5. Once you have a group of 5, set a weekly coffee date for 5 people, but make it very specific what you want to get out of it. Make it very curated in who you want to invite. Make it very strategic in terms of the types of questions you want to ask. Because if you bring together 5 people for an hour, that meeting is not a 1 hour meeting. It's a 5 hour meeting, right? You're borrowing 5 hours from somebody that you'll never give back to them. So it needs to be valuable for them. This podcast may be an hour or an hour and a half, but really it's double that because there's 2 of us here. So when I think about my events or building my community, I realize that a 3-hour dinner is actually a 30-hour commitment if there's 10 people there. What would make that the most valuable? I send out intake forms. I want to get to know people. I ask Mike questions like, hey, where do you feel the most stuck right now? Where do you see your life headed in the next 12 months? What needs to happen for you to get there? Who do you want to connect with? Like, where are you right now? Have you picked up any sports in the last 60 days? Like, I really want to get to know Mike. And then I have an amazing facilitated conversation. Mike's got amazing questions. You could literally Google top 100 deep thought-provoking questions to build relationships and get this unbelievable list of questions that's so much better than what do you do? And then you facilitate the next day, facilitate introductions for people that came to your virtual hangout, whether it was a coffee, whether it was a dinner. The moment you start connecting people, your next dinner is just going to get bigger and it's going to be filled with more quality people. I've got people in my life who have wanted to host a dinner for the last 2 years, And the same question comes up. I don't know anyone who's going to come to my dinner. I don't have a big network. And my easiest response every time, and 99% of people will not do this, is I will say, have a 5-person dinner. You invite 2 people, invite 2 of your best friends to a dinner and ask them to bring 1 person each who you don't know. Right away, you've got your table of 5, right? You do this again a month later with 3 people and ask them to bring 1. Now you've got your table of 6. It's so unbelievable how close some of these goals and objectives and priorities are to you. You're just not reaching out for it. It's so easy for you to reach out to somebody who's not even remotely connected to you today and say, hey, I just read your book. Loved what you said on chapter 6 on page 37. This was my favorite part. P.S. How else? Like, do you have any more books coming out? Right? Be interested in the person. And I think you're going to stand out because everyone has this, not everyone, but a lot of people, where they go wrong in networking and relationships is they go into it with a what's in it for me mentality. And when you do that, you don't allow real relationships to be built.
I love what you said, dude, about everyone could and should build some kind of community. I think that's powerful because I think about even just little things like inviting some friends over for dinner at home at my house. In a small way, that is a community of sorts. It's social leadership. And I find that social leadership just is so invaluable for me to, just do that, right? It's just to become a part of the fabric of who I am as someone as a social leader, because that supports business, right? It supports my relationship, all sorts of different things, my friendships, my own feeling of kind of satisfaction and joy and connectedness. And I think I've spent quite a bit of time over the years being at the effect of, other people's invitations or wanting to, be invited to different things. And maybe for anyone listening, this is a positive kick up the bum that, if you're pining for invitations to different events or things that are on with other people, then, don't wait for the invitation, be the instigator of it.
I think the biggest mistake people are going to make if they're going to do this is that they're going to overthink it and talk themselves out of it. Where do I host it? Do I do it online or at a restaurant? Who do I invite? How many people? How am I going to do this? There's 1,000 reasons why you shouldn't ever host your own dinner that are going to come up in your mind. There's 1,000 reasons. You just need that one reason of why you should. And, being a case study of somebody who used to overthink everything, I'm telling you, I would not have started my own business if I could see step 2 and 3 and 10. Like that's who I needed to be. But I got to a position where I once heard someone say, like, the parachute doesn't open when you're on the cliff, right? And I stayed on the cliff for way too long of my life, like way too long. I just stayed on the cliff. I'm like, hey, why is this parachute not opening? Who's going to catch me? Who's going to save me? And then it just took this simple conversation of saying, hey, man, the parachute only opens if you jump. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks as like the most profound thing I had ever heard. Literally the next day, I quit my 9-to-5 job.
I love it. So good. Karan, dude, it's been just a pleasure. Thank you so much for spending time with us and sharing so openly and just being real, dude. You rock.
Thank you for being just an incredible human, being so open with your time, being so open with your kindness, the way you ask questions, the ease I felt during the last hour and 10 minutes, just your ability to make me feel like a person of value. Man, that's a unique gift that I know you definitely cherish. So kudos to you.
Thank you. I mean, you are. It goes without saying. I'm just reflecting back your awesomeness, and I mean that. So, one last question. Let's assume that you're about to embark on a journey of a new environment, some self-discovery, and like you just said, the parachute won't open if you stand on the cliff. So let's imagine you do go and make the jump, make the leap, and move to Barcelona. My question is, who is the man that you need to show up as to be able to deal with and manage and ultimately thrive through whatever challenge shows up for you in that new journey?
I need to be the type of man, and I will be the type of man that celebrates every single step, regardless of the outcome. Of the type of man who celebrates every single victory, not just the big ones. And I think lastly, the type of person who is amazingly happy with every single minute of the day.
Hoorah!
Hoorah!
Go get him, Tiger.
Great question, man.
Cool. Hey, Karan, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, brother.
Hey, so thanks for listening. The more I record these episodes, the more I realize this show is as much about navigating the emotional journey of business as it is about exploring the dichotomies my guests face along the way. I've come to believe the more awareness we can bring to our emotions, the better the decisions we can make, and therefore the better we can navigate these dichotomies as they come up in our lives. And look, at the end of the day, I just love talking life, business, philosophy with like-minded people who really think deeply about the world, their business, and how to lead a good life. So if you want to connect with me or learn more about some of the things I'm up to, just head to www.mikejamesreid, that's REID.com. There's a whole bunch of links to some of the cool stuff we do at Dent, plus a little more on me as well. Otherwise, you can follow me or connect with me on all the usual socials just by adding /Mike James Reid or searching for Mike Reid as well. Okay, until next time, thanks so much for listening. And one final request is, if you've enjoyed this show, please give it a rating or review on Apple or Google Podcasts or any other way that you listen to the show. Ratings help the show get found and just out to more people who will hopefully love it as much as you do. Plus, it tells me to keep putting these episodes together for you. So thanks so much, and much love from me.